My name is Peter Hein. I'm the president of Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York. We own and operate Fraunces Tavern Museum. On behalf of our society, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's evening preview of our new permanent exhibit, Governing the Nation from Fraunces Tavern, honoring Stanley and Elizabeth Scott. At this opening presentation, we are speaking from the Davis Flag Gallery, formerly the Kathryn and Shelby Cullom Davis Educational Center for American History. Our new permanent exhibit, Governing the Nation from Fraunces Tavern, is downstairs on the second floor. If you haven't seen it on your way up, please be sure you see it after this presentation. We owe a great debt of gratitude to Stanley and Elizabeth Scott. They have been longtime supporters of our society and our museum, and they provided the generous support that enabled us to create this new permanent exhibit. Stanley Scott has been a member of the society for over 70 years, since 1951, and has held numerous positions in our society, including serving as chairman or co-chairman of the Museum and Art Committee for a number of years. Stanley is also an honorary president of our society. Elizabeth Scott has been an active DAR member for many years. She served as regent of the Mary Washington Colonial Chapter of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution. The Scotts have been longtime admirers of George Washington and have donated numerous treasures from their personal collections to our museum, including portraits and a sculpture of George Washington that are on display in the Washington Portrait Gallery, which is adjacent to the new exhibit, Governing Our Nation from Fraunces Tavern. We honored both Stanley and Elizabeth Scott as Distinguished Patriots in 2019 at our annual George Washington Birthday Ball. So I'd like to have everybody join me tonight in thanking and recognizing Stanley and Elizabeth Scott.
You're here.
I would also like to recognize the following officers of our society who are present here tonight. Treasurer Alan Bors. Alan, right? Our third vice president, Craig Weber, who you will hear from in his capacity as co-chairman of the Museum and Art Committee. Our registrar, Scott Jeffrey. Paul Dietrich, who is the chairman of the Sons of the Revolution Book Award Committee. Paul. And I'd also like to recognize past presidents who are here with us this evening, specifically Bob McKay and Ambrose Richardson, who you will also hear from in his capacity as co-chairman of the Museum and Art Committee. In that regard, I'd like to recognize the members of the Long Room Association, our Planned Giving Society, who are here tonight, and that includes Bob McKay and Craig Weber. And then finally, I'd like to acknowledge leaders from other societies who are here this evening. I believe Sarah Lynch, who is the regent of the Manhattan chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Sarah, are you here? Yeah, I guess she may be coming shortly. Melinda Allison, not sure I've seen Melinda yet. She is the vice regent of the Fort Greene chapter. I do see Lorraine Bell, who is the former regent of the Knickerbocker chapter, and I believe currently chief of the Caledonian Club. So welcome, Lorraine. I'm glad you could join us this evening. Our program will be brief. You'll first hear from Scott Dwyer, who is the director of Sons of the Revolution in the state of New York and our Fraunces Tavern Museum. Scott played a critical, integral role in co-curating the new permanent exhibit. And Scott, thank you so much for everything you did to make this exhibit happen. Scott will speak briefly. Then you'll hear from Craig Weaver, who is co-chairman of our Museum and Art Committee. Craig was just instrumental in making this happen in so many ways. Craig has also donated a number of the objects that are featured in the exhibit, as well as now in our long room downstairs. So if you haven't taken the time while you're here to see the long room in its current configuration, you should make it a point to do that before you leave this evening. And then finally, Ambrose Richardson, past president and co-chairman of the Museum and Art Committee, will wrap up. A housekeeping note, for those of you joining us for dinner at about 7:20, we're going to make our way downstairs to the Bissell Room in the restaurant. So with that, Scott, would you please take the podium?
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I had to close the AV door because it was in my shot. Thank you, Allie, for correcting that. Again, my name's Scott Dwyer, director. Yes. Director for Sons of the Revolution, State of New York, and its Fraunces Tavern Museum. My job is to do a lot of thinking. An exhibition like this requires a team effort, generally a much larger team than the one that opened this exhibition tonight here at the museum, and I want to recognize that. We are a small team, a small, strong team that works day in and day out to create what you see in front of you, and with the help and support of many in our community, in the public, and in Sons of the Revolution. So we really want to thank all of our team, all of our community here tonight, not here tonight, who will be coming here very shortly, I'm sure, to again create what you see in front of you. First, I do want to thank Craig Weaver, my co-curator on this exhibition, for devoting his time and providing his knowledge and access to the curatorial team at Colonial Williamsburg, who offered valuable input at every stage of the process, from concept to installation. This team also stands on the shoulders of past curators at Fraunces Tavern Museum who have covered this period in a handful of past temporary exhibitions going back for decades, which allowed us to build on and work and create what you see here today. Also want to thank Robert Liverant, who provided valuable public relations assistance, Atlas Print Solutions, and Dugal Visual Solutions, and Kittinger Furniture Company, who provided fabrication and assistance for our narrative panels and reproductions. Also, before we even got to the exhibition, we had to create the room and make it habitable again, because it had been largely untouched from an infrastructure standpoint for 50 years. So we're talking about GFK for electrical, Hayward for floors, alphabet signs to create the beautiful letters on top of the gallery, and also Scenic Wallpaper, who took hours and hours to clean each of the panels of wallpaper with a dry sponge and then repaint everything and then restore it. So that was what you see here, is the work and dedication to all of the craftsmen, all of the people who came together to create what you see here today. I want to also recognize a couple of the special guests here who are also very instrumental and will hopefully continue to support us as we open this exhibition to the public. I want to thank two members of the Museum of American Diplomacy who are here, Allison Mann, as well as Lauren Fisher. Thank you so much for coming. We very much look forward to working with you as we open this exhibition and program around it for children and young adults throughout the country. So thank you so much for being here. We really look forward to working with you. I also want to recognize members of the Consulate General of the People's Republic of China for attending today. Trade with China began during this period as well. We focused on that in our exhibition panels. So we really want to talk about the entire global story that was happening in this country at the time with countries around the world. So thank you for coming tonight. We very much appreciate it. I also want to thank a friend of mine and the head of the New York Preservation Archive Project, Brad Vogel, who's here today. So thank you, Brad, for coming. This is another great restoration and preservation story here at the Tavern, which I'm sure you know, and we want to thank you for doing your work to preserve the preservationists here in the city and everywhere. So thank you so much, very much for coming. Just to preempt Craig for a bit, the idea to create a permanent exhibition space focusing on this period was at least 50 years old. But it took this team of people assembled who I've thanked to make it happen and make it happen coming out of a pandemic. So again, thank you everybody for that. But most importantly, didn't want to forget, I want to thank the team of members at the museum now, and most recently directly because of them, they are directly responsible for what you see today as well. Lisa Goulet, Collections, Eric Sussman, Facilities, Diego Ferrunda, Development, Ali Delianis, Communications and Marketing, Mary Chaltas Ottamanelli, Sarah Nishaw, and Jessica Bryant in Education and Public Programs. This is the whole team, and I've probably forgotten people, so my apologies. It's very much an Oscar speech, but thank you so much for everybody for all of your help. The exhibition highlights the U.S. Confederation period between the end of the Revolution and the signing of the Constitution, during which the newly independent United States was transitioning from a loose confederation of colonies into a new country, which had to govern itself and interact with the rest of the world with some semblance of unity. And that was a difficult task. When New York City became the capital and the Departments of Foreign Affairs, War, and Board of Treasury moved in, there was a lot on their plate. Foreign Affairs had conflicts in North America and abroad. The Treasury was dealing with a financially devastated country, New York City being a prime example of that, having been occupied for the duration of the war. And the War Department was trying to figure out how to defend itself without being able to raise an army. But the work of all these departments helped influence the formation of the US Constitution, written to solve these issues based on the work that was happening right here in this building. So again, we really wanted to focus on this second story that we like to call it for Fraunces Tavern, because everybody knows us for the long room and Washington's farewell and the celebration of Evacuation Day when the British left American soil for the last time. This is the additional story for Fraunces Tavern, how it helped create this country from a loose confederation of colonies into the country we have today, based on the work that was happening just downstairs and throughout the building. 54 Pearl Street, I should say. We're now 5 buildings, but 54 Pearl. But the exhibition itself, despite all the departments that were happening here, the exhibition that you see here is really a creation of what the Department of Foreign Affairs looked like. And so talk about more of how we furnish that and why it looks the way it does. I want to introduce Craig Weaver, our art viewer.
So, Allie, not knowing, is this on or?
It's on.
It's on, okay. My voice is always so loud anyway. But Scott, thank you. Okay, I mean, this was a great team. I think you and me doing this, I had tremendous fun. I hope you did too. And really, you know, it was a lot of fun. And I hope everybody enjoys looking at it. What we started with was interesting because we had a dining room in Fraunces Tavern that had been put together many years ago. It was out of place for a building and also for what we seek to portray in this museum, because it was post 1810, 1820. It's called the Clinton Dining Room. It was just really irrelevant, but there had been people circulating for a very long time. I've belonged for 45 years, saying we should take advantage of what we really were and depict the offices that were in this building. Well, never occurred. We always had one catastrophe after another, from Sandy to floods to the Trade Center to something else. And we were always just chasing, and as soon as we'd pull out of it, it just didn't work. But it was a fortuitous or lucky time. The past couple of years, things were better. There were no problems at the horizon. The Scots, who have been, as was mentioned before, tremendous supporters, were willing and able to step in here and really support this and get it off the ground. And so Scott and I ran with this. And I think that the end result I am very proud of personally. The interesting thing, as Scott alluded to, this was the first executive office building in the country with all 3 offices, Treasury, War, and Foreign Affairs under one roof. There were different little locations for the Department of Foreign Affairs and some of the others, but this was really the first executive office building that existed. And the reason we chose to do the Department of Foreign Affairs is because we are in possession of facsimile of the original cash book from that particular department. Almost unique, if not unique, in regard to U.S. government offices or U.S. government affiliations of any sort. So we could start with an inventory and try to assemble it, which is what we did. We got rid of items that were in there, and then we started our search to really find new items and assemble them so that they would work in this, and try to find them as close as possible to what was in this inventory. And following along with that, we have a chair that I would point out down there, a Windsor chair that is Brandon McBride, who was a cabinet maker right here on Pearl Street. So it's a wonderful acquisition and totally local. We also have a book press. Book press was mentioned. It's one of the few American book presses in existence. So it's a great piece for this exhibit. We also have a large conference table, which was made in New York City. It is bowl and claw foot, squared bowl and claw foot, carved knees, beautiful table, a little bit covered by green material, but that's what they did in those days. But it's a beautiful thing, and that's what we had as the actual meeting location for the people to do the work. And we have on exhibit for the first time our Retzer map, which is a true treasure of the museum. It's a map of downtown Manhattan. Very few exist. It's when you go into the room to your left on the wall. It is truly a treasure. What does the room depict? Well, it's supposed to depict, those of you who read the press release, as if John Jay simply went walking in as the secretary at that point. The office was busy with clerks. It was busy with Jay's deputy, not Jay himself. He had an office in the building, but not in that particular room. But it was a very hectic place. So what we have is we have the large table, which is where the real business was done, and we have a facsimile of them looking at a map dealing with the Mississippi River issue with Spain, the Florida land dispute. We then move to the deputy's desk, which is to the left in the room, which shows the highest level ranking official in the room. We then have a clerk's desk representing one of many clerks that were in the office. And then we have a messenger's desk, which is to the right, who took all the mail coming in, going out, and supervised all that stuff going on. So there's a hierarchy of the desks. There's a hierarchy of the ink sets. There's a Sheffield plate ink set on the deputy's desk. There's a brass one, which is on the large conference table. There's a pewter one on the clerk's desk. And there's a ceramic one, which is on the messenger's desk, showing once again the function and the different type of levels of workmanship and work that went on in the particular office. It was a very hectic place, and there were a lot of different people running around at all times. There was a newspaper in there that was from the very period that was published. It was from in the French language. It was in France. That's on the table, on the messenger's table, which is totally applicable with what was being done by the office at that point. So with that being said, you know, we put it together. We hope that we show that across the hall. As was mentioned, the long room has been redone a bit, streamlined, some different furniture, but also some elimination of some extraneous items that were not really relevant. I think you'll enjoy it if you go in it. If you recognize the old long room, you'll appreciate how nice the new one is. And just real fast talking, this place is really, I think, on a trajectory to do wonderful things in the next year to 5 years. Scott mentioned that this was the next permanent installation. We've accomplished that. Another one that is going to be occurring is the Birch Trials. This building was the first site of what was perhaps, if not the largest, one of the very close to being largest emancipation of African Americans in America prior to the Civil War. 200 and some people, 2,000 and some people walked into this building and walked out free. And that has never really been commemorated, but we're going to establish a gallery in the back here to do just that. And in the fall, we're hoping that we're going to have a new exhibition, which will not be a permanent one, but an exhibition in the Messick, which is what you walk through, on George Washington and pop culture, which will be curated by our new committee, museum committee member, Renee Witterstatter, who is very, very much preeminent in the cartoon comic area. I think we're going into an area that's really exciting. And then when that finishes, we're looking to the 250th of the nation, and we'll get to that in a couple of years. So with that, I thank you very much. And Ambrose, my co-chair of the museum committee, I take over.
Thank you very much. I do have to give thanks for this event to Scott who worked incredibly hard. What you see in the government office is not a first draft. I mean, this is like the 13th draft of what would be there. I also have to thank my co-chair, Craig Weaver, whose energy, efforts, and expertise were invaluable in pulling this together. When I was president of the Sons, I had seen some of the reports of the offices, and I thought, we really should use this space for a government office. Craig discovered this was not a novel idea on my part. It had been around for decades. And one of my objects as president of the Sons was to leave the organization better than it was when I started. And one of my greatest achievements was having a successor like Peter Hein, who has actually achieved the sort of things that I talked about. So tonight, we're finally realizing this vision from decades ago to create this office. And it's so appropriate that we're doing this because of the special nature of Fraunces Tavern. This was the place which, for decades leading up to the Revolution and subsequent to the Revolution, was the locus of activity. It was the best place in town. It's where the elite and the tradesmen could meet. So we're famous for George Washington's farewell here, but there's a reason that it took place here. Because everything took place here, or it took place across the street, which was the Royal Exchange, an open-air market with a meeting place above that, or at the coffee house at the end of the block. So this block, this area, this place is where so much happened. I'm a great-grandnephew of James Madison, who lived in New York on Fulton Street. He was a member of the Continental Congress. He came to Fraunces Tavern. After John Jay negotiated the Jay-Gardaki Treaty, James Madison was irate because it didn't provide for navigation of the Mississippi for Americans and sort of cut off the produce that was developed by the Western settlers. The Jay-Gardaki Treaty was never presented to Congress because it was dead on arrival, or would have been dead on arrival to do that. But what it did make clear to everyone is that the Confederation of States was not a viable international entity. Although they were engaged in border negotiations, attempting to deal with the British, who under the Treaty of Paris in 1783 were supposed to evacuate their forts, but didn't, in dealing with the various Indian nations, where Secretary Knox was sort of negotiating with a pair of deuces in his hand. The army was down to 300 people at that point, whereas the various Indian nations had thousands of warriors working for them. But what it did establish, as Scott Dwyer has said, is a negative proof of concept. They figured out and demonstrated what didn't work. And this was to have an organization with disparate heads who didn't have any central mechanism for achieving decisions. We have here a proclamation from the mayor of New York, which is lovely, which I will read to you. It says, whereas, as the first capital of the United States, New York City has always boasted a robust spirit of patriotism and national pride. We're incredibly proud of our sister city's stately history and the pivotal role the five boroughs have played in the formation and foundation of our shared identity as Americans. Since 1907, the Fraunces Tavern Museum has been key in fostering a greater understanding of and appreciation for our nation's early history, and I am proud to applaud its extraordinary efforts to share its valuable resources and knowledge with all New Yorkers. Whereas, Fraunces Tavern Museum's new exhibit, Governing the Nation from Fraunces Tavern, will present New Yorkers with a unique opportunity to learn more about the history of the U.S. Department of Foreign Affairs and War and Treasury. Now the Department of State, which was headquartered at Fraunces Tavern from 1785 to 1788. The exhibit will depict the U.S. Department of Foreign Affairs as it was during this period, under the leadership of statesman and patriot John Jay, and will present the diplomatic, financial, and military challenges the department faced between the end of the American Revolution and the ratification of the United States Constitution. Whereas, for more than a century, the Fraunces Tavern Museum has worked to preserve and interpret the rich history of the American Revolutionary era through public education, lectures, and a wide variety of collections and public events. Today, it gives me great pleasure to join the Fraunces Tavern Museum for the opening of Governing the Nation from Fraunces Tavern, its newest permanent exhibition. I look forward to the many ways that the great works of this time-honored institution will continue to help build a better, brighter city for all. Now, therefore, I, Eric Adams, Mayor of the City of New York, do hereby proclaim Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022, the City of New York as Fraunces Tavern Day. Take over?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Scott, Craig, and Ambrose. So our program is concluded. Please enjoy the refreshments. Take your time to look around the museum. Certainly, if you haven't seen it, go back down to the second floor to see and study the exhibit, informed by what you have heard. Again, those who are going for dinner should gather and go downstairs to the Bissell Room in the back of the restaurant at approximately 7:20. Thank you all for coming.